Greetings. I wanted to do a brief rejoinder to Steve Ritchie's response to David Bercot's lecture on what the early Christians believed about the Trinity, links to which you can find in the description below. Now, the main point that I wanted to focus on here is that Mr. Ritchie is essentially taking two different forms of modalism that existed in the pre-Nicene period, a radical form that he is a proponent of, and a more generic, watered-down form that was far more numerous, and he's attempting to conflate these two to make it look as if this is the predominant position of the early church. Now, in order to illustrate this, I'm going to be citing from the Encyclopedia of Ancient Christianity, a massively peer-reviewed and current source of patristic scholarship. This is volume 2, page 819. A note on terminology: Partapassianism, modalism, and monarchianism, for all practical intents and purposes, are being used synonymously here. So what we have is Partapassianism encountered a better reception, that is, better reception than adoptionism, which was another heresy of the time. Begun at the end of the 2nd century by Noetus in Smyrna, exported to Rome, it thrived in the first decades of the 3rd century. Epigonius, Cleomenes, Praxius, Sabellius, these are all individuals that taught that particular doctrine. Under the name of Sabellianism, it spread throughout Egypt in the middle of the 3rd century, and from there to various places in the East. Alongside these radical forms of monarchianism, but not to be confused with them, a more generic monarchianism existed. It intensely affirmed monotheism and was characterized by the suspicion and aversion to the theology of the Logos, which, in polemics with radical monarchianism, always continued to develop. In that sense, if radical monarchianism was condemned at Rome, a generically oriented monarchianism remained as the faith of the community. And in the East, this monarchian sensibility strongly opposed Origen's theology. The monarchian believers accused Dionysius of Alexandria at Rome, circa 257, but they were not heretics, i.e. not Sabellians. Probably in this context, it was affirmed that the Son is homoousios with the Father, in opposition to the theologies of the Logos, which affirmed two ousia, or substances, of the Father and Son. It is difficult to know the precise character of this monarchianism because it only rarely found a way to express itself at a literary level, e.g. at the start of the 4th century. Now, there are several points here that are not to be glossed over. I've read other patristic scholars who termed what this source says is generically oriented monarchianism as naive modalism. Essentially what we're looking at here is a modalism of the laity. And if you look at the sources that Mr. Ritchie cites, Tertullian's Against Praxius, chapter 3, and Origen's Commentary on John, book 1, Tertullian refers to these individuals as the simple. Origen refers to them somewhat more harshly, perhaps, as foolish and self-contradictory in their views. But we are looking at the laity, which were largely illiterate, and that explains well how their views only rarely found a way to express themselves at a literary level. But at the same time, the laity of the pre-Nicene church didn't have to have deep theological correctness in order to be considered Christians in good standing. Really, the only theological points that were completely necessary could be encapsulated in the Apostles' Creed, which is very simple. And so the early Christian leaders and thinkers were able to take naive modalism and realize when somebody crossed the very broad line that separated that from a heretical modalism, such as the individuals that were listed here, including Sabellius himself. And the latter type was never really very popular in the church. In fact, Mr. Ritchie cites Paul Paveo early in his video to the effect that the reason that the writings of Sibelius et al. Disappeared was because they were all destroyed. Paul Paveo is actually a friend of mine, and small world, he co-founded David Brissot's first house church that they had together. And he explained to me that his real perspective on the matter is the writings of Sibelius disappeared not so much because they were hunted down and destroyed, but because they fell out of vogue because they were never really particularly popular. And another point that I wanted to touch on is Mr. Ritchie's frequent reference to semi-Arianism as a characterization of what some of the early Christians believed, and particularly Tertullian again. One of the sources he appeals to is Tertullian's treatise against Hermogenes. And the line that people focus on, just a couple weeks ago, a Mormon cited the same thing at me. This is fairly popular. For him, there existed neither sin nor the Son. You get that little bit quoted out of context quite often, but let me just give you the full paragraph here. The name of God, so we say, has always been with himself and in himself, but not always that of Lord. For the state of being inherent in the one is different from that of the other. God is the name of the substance itself, that is, of the divinity, but Lord is the name not of a substance, but of a power. The substance has always existed together with its name, which is God. But the name, Lord, was a later addition, since it is the name of something coming in addition. For ever since things began to exist upon which the power of a Lord could operate, from that moment, by ascension of this power, he both became Lord and received that name. Nor is it surprising, for God is also a father, and God is also a judge, but he has not always been a father and judge for the simple reason that he has always been God. For he could not be a father before the Son was, nor judge before there was sin. Now there was a time when for him there existed neither sin nor the Son, the former to make God a judge, and the latter a father. In the same way he did not become Lord before the things existed of which he was to become the Lord. He was to become Lord but once in the course of time, as he became Father by the Son, and he became Judge by sin, so he also became Lord by the things which he had made to serve him. The whole point here is not that the Son didn't exist at any given point in time, but that he did not exist as the Son. It's a fairly common pre-Nicene belief that he existed as the Word within the Father, and at a point in time came out of the Father and then became the Son. But always existed. So this semi-Arian mischaracterization doesn't really apply to Tertullian, much less to Bercot himself. Mr. Ritchie even suggested at one point that Bercot's views are based upon him having been a Jehovah's Witness in his early life, which doesn't particularly make a lot of sense since he left the Jehovah's Witnesses to become an evangelical Christian, then discovered the early Christian writings, briefly became an Anglican priest, and is now, and has been for quite some time, a Mennonite in good standing, none of whom hold to a Jehovah's Witness view on the matter. Instead, Bercot is just looking at what the pre-Nicene Christians believed regarding the subordination of the Son to the Father. And to that effect, early Christian fathers by Henry Bettenson, just this quick little blurb from him. According to the quotation in Justinian, Origen gave here a bold statement of the subordination of the Son and the Holy Spirit. Subordinationism, it is true, was pre-Nicene orthodoxy, but it was not generally so frankly expressed. The substantial accuracy of Justinian's quotation seems to be guaranteed by Jerome. It's page 293. The quotation from Tertullian was page 29 of the Ancient Christian Writers Series, volume 24, if you want to look any of those up. Are we to believe that Henry Bettenson has been influenced by the Jehovah's Witnesses? No, he's just taking what the early Christians said about subordinationism at face value. It's not semi-Arianism. It's an anachronistic term if there ever was one. It's simply pre-Nicene orthodoxy, and the subordinationism itself is irreconcilable with a view of oneness modalism. Thank you.